I want to tell you a story. Are you sitting comfortably, boys and girls? Good, then I shall begin. Once upon a time, an ex-Prime Minister wrote a book about how awful all the other Prime Ministers were. But before we get to David Cameron's memoirs, Labour front bencher Dawn Butler, she was seeing red over Morris men in blackface. Ramblers of colour who bumped into folk dancers in blackface, and they were very unhappy about it. I'm not sure they have grounds to be.
Oh, I'd be mortified. And yes, I'd be unhappy and I would be mortified. I'd probably run in the other direction because I'd be scared that they're going to try and lynch me or something. But it would be absolutely mortifying to come across.
The tradition is, I mean, the trouble is its roots are
But why is it a tradition?
Well, one of the Morris dancing, one of the schools of thought is that the name Morris comes from Moorish, and that actually the dance was originally introduced by people with brown faces to the UK. Another school of thought says that begging was frowned upon, an illegal activity, and it was not unheard of for people to blacken their faces to go out begging at night so people wouldn't recognise them. There's also a light with darkness and light that you have in pagan culture, lots of black things during the winter and lots of white things during the summer, and in terms of symbol of death and rebirth, of night and day, of winter and summer. All of these sort of
negative and positive, and all the negative is everything to do with dark, and all the positive is everything to do with white.
But this is night and day.
This is, night and day. But it's. I mean, the thing is, you have to ask yourself: is it offensive? Is it globally offensive? And if the answer is yes,
but if the offences are based on dodgy grounds, that we are assuming that there's some kind of racist link, then the people that are feeling offence have no grounds to be offended.
But the thing is that is it offensive? So you have to say to yourself, is this an offensive? Why can't you Morris dance without blacking up? I mean, it's really quite simple. I mean, there's
hundreds of years of custom and habit. Change it because of ill-founded nonsense based on prejudice that doesn't exist. One might say that's the root of madness, and that what we should all do is just take a pause for breath and reflection and allow.
But I think this is exactly where the debate is going in terms of combating more than 100 years of racial discrimination and how we combat that. And this, I think, will be a conversation that we'll have on many different levels and many different things.
It seems David Cameron isn't the only politician with a downer on our new Prime Minister Boris Johnson either.
I mean, our conference is in Brighton, so we could even
commute,
travel and commute. So, I mean, Parliament is sovereign, and we're very, very serious about that. And we're very serious about holding Boris Johnson to account, because look what happens when he runs wild. I mean, we have a Prime Minister who the far right see as their leader. We are in very dark times in our country, and we have to really be alert to this.
Having spent 3 weeks in the I'm a Celebrity jungle, I was keen to meet Ed Stafford, a real-life survivalist, and his equally adventurous wife, Laura Bingham. But who would have imagined spending a couple of weeks naked and alone on a desert island could have left Ed needing years of therapy? My God, you did look unwell as well, it has to be said.
It was a bit of a... Yeah, that first one, it was 60 days on my own on an island, and it was a bit of a knife edge because I was sort of trying to stay on the right side of sanity, but also slightly unravelling whilst, again, trying to film and make a whole TV programme at the same time. So, yeah, it was. I ended up being in therapy for a couple of years after that one. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I genuinely wasn't expecting that
That's how authentic it was.
Post-mental breakdown,
Yeah. Yeah, it was full on me, yeah.
I'm absolutely speechless. I mean, in one sense, I'm not surprised because, there's a part of me which sits there thinking, television, it's all lies and so forth. But it did look like you were having a tricky time. So why did you do it?
I think in terms of the sort of television being all lies and stuff, I mean, I've got a lot to be grateful for the fact that the general public wanted to scrutinise this sort of television and wanted I think there was an appetite for an authentic version, you know. If he wasn't to catch food, if he wasn't to get a fire going, wouldn't it be far more interesting to see the suffering, see the after effects, see the consequences? And I think that's what I ended up building my career on, actually, bizarrely. And you know, I did have to suffer, but why do we do it? I think it's evolved over the years. I think initially, if I'm honest, when I was younger, it was a bit chest beaty, a bit ego, a bit young man. But it's evolved into something actually quite wholesome now, you know, being put into situations where you don't necessarily have all the answers and you're humbled time and time again, and you're having to think outside the box and learn and grow and adapt. And actually, it's, you know, now...
I was going to say, all of which is fine when it's you or another survivor. And Laura, I mean, you're no stranger to adventure yourself. Some people might say, I'd like to think Mrs. Wright would not be one of them, as I've kicked around some ideas myself, but some people might say I think your son was 21 months old for this new series, Man, Woman, Child, Wild. Some people might say putting a baby into that situation, a child that can't actually argue for or against it, might be irresponsible, verging on downright dangerous, Laura.
Yeah, and like I've said before, I hope it confronts people's idea of what parenting should be, and I hope it makes people question what's good parenting, what's bad parenting, if we're being too risk averse in our day and age, whether we're mollycoddling too much. We went to an indoor play centre a few weeks ago and 2 children got stuck halfway up a ladder that was like 3 foot off the floor. And I thought, well, I was so proud because at that moment too, Ram pretty much went head first down this huge slide and I was like, that's my boy. And we allow him to fall off little tiny, like half a foot drops because I want him to learn the consequence of actions and I want him to know that there's a fire there and not to go near it rather than bordering up a fire. And it's about managing risk and putting our children in like situations that are partially risky but not risky. I'm not really explaining myself properly. If you know what I mean. Like I want Ran to have the ability to be able to go up and down a ladder. I will be there underneath him to catch him when he falls, if he should fall. But I don't want him to be so scared of life that he can't actually achieve anything with it.
We're talking about the Family's new show, the Stafford Family's new show, Man, Woman, Child, Wild. It's a Discovery Channel presentation, comes out at the end of the month, that sees your family move to an island off Sumatra. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. I mean...
For how long?
It was a month away from home.
And what's on the island?
Not much. Not much at all. It's uninhabited. It had a fresh water source and it's very difficult to find a uninhabited island with a fresh water source. I think it was a former monkey colony actually off the coast of Sumatra. But it gave us the opportunity. I mean, we did, obviously, there's lots of safety backup in place, but it gave us the opportunity to have an authentic survival experience within certain sort of safety parameters. If we'd got the satellite phone out, we could have called a doctor in within about 20 minutes, I think, to the island if the weather had been all right anyway. So it did work. And, you know, I'd always thought, I'd spent a lot of time with indigenous tribes, and as soon as Laura got pregnant, everyone's like, oh, you need to buy this kind of buggy and you need to buy this kind of cot and this kind of toy and this type of a mobile and this type of... There's so much paraphernalia, and, you know, you need to read the Gina Ford book about how to bully your child into going to sleep every 3 hours or whatever it is. And we just thought, this is nonsense. This must be a more natural way to bring up a child. And so that sort of evolved into this project where we chucked ourselves on a desert island for a month.
Tell us, I'm fascinated, Laura, a bit by your childhood, because I've just read what I can find about you online, and you really don't seem to be utterly fearless and have been from a young age. Big cycle rides. I think you cycled across some South America, plus river explorations as well. What was your child like? Were you encouraged?
I had family out in South Africa, so we went out there and did a bit of whitewater rafting and sort of went on safaris a bit.
Encouraged by your family, your parents, to perhaps confront dangers as you're doing now with your son Ran?
Yeah, I think so. But equally, at the age of 15, my dad said, "Oh, should we go to South Africa again to see the family?" And I said, "No, I really want a new TV." And he was like, "Really? You want a new TV over going to South Africa?" So I think at the age of 16, my dad fell over and got a blood clot in the head and had a personality change, and that sort of ignited a bit of a troublesome latter teen years. And then I went travelling to try and find myself, that sort of cliche, and then ended up just loving adventure so much that I then sort of tried to make it a career, and then because of it met Ed, and then we...
Two traveller survivalists.
Yeah.
Does that do you look forward to going away from each other?
Oh God, no, never. But like you always say that. Why are you looking at me funny? Literally, he cried this morning in the car on the way here because he was like, the hardest part of what I do is leaving you and Ran.
I love him so boy, much. I've just been away for a month, only been back 2
days. Your macho image?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the macho image went years ago. I've been away for a month. Little boy didn't know this morning that I wasn't going away for another month. And you know, when you see like somebody's face crumple, and he just thought I was going away for a
No,
month.
and he was like, "Me come too."
Yeah.
Me come too. Chasing you, and I was like,
I think we got an amazing opportunity to do what I do and love doing, but in a family capacity. And it was an incredible experience.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
and that's why this sort of island experience was so wonderful, because what other family gets to spend a whole month together playing with crabs and, you know, going on adventures through...
Any problems? I mean, in a month? I mean, did you run into... particularly from Rand's perspective, really?
From Rand's perspective, no.
Nothing
he got
at all?
a bit of a chesty cough on the flight over there. And then we went to... I know, it's that was probably one of the most dangerous parts of what we did, was the flight over there. And we spent some time with a tribe, and it didn't go away, so then we moved to the coast a bit earlier than we were planning to, and then it was perfectly fine. He got a bit of a heat rash near the end.
That's it. That was
and
it.
that's when we were like, okay, maybe it's time that we wrap it up.
And you two, fine while you were there?
Yeah, I mean, my lowest point might have been saying, we're not making an effing YouTube video, Laura.
Because obviously I'm more of a social media person. I make more YouTube videos and stuff. And I was like, no, I really like this camera angle. And he's like, so who's the one that has 8 series on Discovery? We're not making a YouTube video.
Not my finest hour.
Oh, you went there.
Not my finest hour at all. But I think that was
day one.
Day one, lots of stresses. We actually, bizarrely, we recognised quite early on that we couldn't just storm away from each other up the beach, because we were actually reliant on each other to look after our little boy. And so I thought that might end up being a bit claustrophobic, because we were so dependent on each other. But it ended up being one of those situations where, you know, when you go through something and you just have a really close bond because you've been through something very tough together.
Really harmonious.
And it wasn't easy all the time, and, you know, storms hit the island after a couple of days, and, you know, with Laura huddling underneath this
Did he get the
makeshift
fire
shelter.
going, by the way? Did he get a fire
We got
going?
it going together.
You
We
He
did
blistered
get it
his
going
hands doing like machete chopping, so we had to like tap in and out.
Because you do
to keep-
fire rolling.
Not
with
as
stick.
well as him by
Ah,
far.
really?
Not. I can maintain heat, but I can't quite get an ember there. But it was
You
just
did get
enough.
You did get a number.
What's
I
it
don't know.
like once you're... Because we were talking about depression, and once
When you're
when
coming
you
back from
come back, what's
holidays
it
and
like when you're
trips.
back home after, you
To
know...
be honest, I had more problem with depression coming back to an empty flat in Battersea before I'd met Laura, before I got my little
Yeah,
boy.
just
It's like it's
adjusting.
amazing. Yeah, got my own survival show on Discovery Channel. Sounds amazing. You come back and it's an empty flat, and you're just like, so what? You know, really. But this very same job now, come back, and obviously I'm now providing, and so the financial side of it is, it feels like I'm doing a more wholesome job, but also the job itself just I don't know, it feels more wholesome now that there's a sort of
And then-
hub of love to come back to.
He comes home and I jump out from behind a door and he screams, or we're in Sainsbury's and I jab him in the ribs and he screams and I just walk off like I don't know him. So I like to keep him humble. I like to make sure his heart's still
Keep him
beating.
grounded.
Dick Clement and Ian Frenais are genuine kings of comedy. They gave the world Auf Wiedersehen, Pet and Porridge. But it was the Likely Lads that set them on the path to mega fame.
Frank Langella wrote a book, which we both liked, called Drop Names, where every chapter was about a different person. And we liked that as a sort of formula. That was a starter motor for us, you know. And we agreed that we weren't going to write it together, because the one thing you can't collaborate on is prose. Even if we're doing a memo, it's eventually say, oh, you write it and I'll rewrite it, or the other way around. But dialogue's fine.
So you're seeing one moment from both of your perspectives.
Well, we agreed to write half the chapters each. So, and then we would critique them. Occasionally, one of us does a footnote to the other story. But some of the stories are uniquely Ian's, and a few of them are uniquely mine. So, and then we wrote linking dialogue in between, just to sort of pull it all
How
together.
did the two of you originally come together then? How did it start?
Are we going to tell one of the real stories of it? We've written three versions of it. We've written three versions of it.
So, no, let's be absolutely honest. It was a bordello in Manila.
That's not in the book. Though. It was too
Was it the
long.
Uxbridge Arms?
Yes, it
Yeah,
was.
oh,
yes.
was that what it was
Uxbridge
called?
Arms.
The Uxbridge Arms Manila. Seems. It was the Uxbridge Arms in Notting Hill Gate.
Yeah, you got it right.
Introduced by a mutual friend who was at the LSE, and he said, "Dick, this is Ian," and that was it.
So boring,
that
so
was the
banal.
meeting. That was how we met.
And how long between then and putting the Likely Lads together?
Well, I guess a couple of years. I was at the BBC as a studio manager, I always thought it was a very good pond to be in. It was my first job after national service. And Ian was out of work, or actually he was...
I was on my gap year. It was the third, but that's what they now call it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He was doing some very odd jobs, like domestic. I'm not giving anything away that isn't in the book. He was charring, okay, and I'm amazed.
Tea,
right? Yes,
he was my most distinguished client.
Yes.
Got a jar of paprika from his wife. God knows why. They wasn't any use to me. Sorry, I'm interrupting Dick.
This is a comedy in itself, isn't it?
He got tips from a nice lady in St John's Wood for being a nice Jewish boy, and he didn't mention that he was actually a C of E. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, this is a bit of a diversion. I can now remember, it's just come to me, that the agency was called New Pin Domestic. And
you really were charring.
For Francis Chichester.
It was unemployed actors, mostly. And I remember going to a very posh and attractive woman off Harley Street in a Mews with her 13-year-old very precocious daughter. And when I got the Hoover out, they said, "So you're an actor?" And I said, "No." And they were both so upset. And they said, "They say they're actors. Why do we never get one?" So I said, I just made it up on the spot. I said, "I write songs for Adam Faith." And that mollified them.
As it would.
Yeah, and then I scratched their bath.
Anyway, that bit I'm not surprised
That
about.
was a long diversion.
Because he can't change a light bulb, actually. You know, he's completely domestically impaired, so it was not a good fit.
Fifth gear petrol head Jason Plato had us screaming with his an hilarious count of meeting a rather angry Prince Charles on the fast lane of a motorway.
I was, slightly over the speed limit, and the road was relatively busy. And there was this Range Rover behind, wanting to get past, but giving it the big aggressive flashing. And I'm not having that. Because I was in the outside lane, and I was making progress. Anyway, he kept on, and he got closer and closer. And you should never do this, but I did initiate a little brake test just to say, look, back off, pal.
Yeah. Cut
a long story short, I got bored with this, so then I pulled over, and as it came past, I timed my moment of gesticulation, and as my finger had come up, and the words had come out of my mouth, I was staring at a familiar face, and it was Prince Charles, and I'll never forget. He was sat in the passenger seat. I'll never forget the look on his face, which was a mixture of sheer horror and amusement.
Sociologist Dr. Ashley Frawley didn't mince her words when it came to the grovelling apology offered by Canadian Premier Justin Trudeau after pictures have emerged of him blacking up in his youth.
Is it something that he should have been quite so effusive in apologising for?
It's a little tempting to revel in this because he's so right on, as you said.
Yeah.
But I think we should be careful here because, this idea of cancelling people by trawling through their past and looking for missteps is really, really dangerous.
Agreed.
And it's fun to do it when someone is in power, but it happens to other people as well. So as soon as you're in the public eye, someone will try to find something to throw dirt on you. And this is, this happens for regular people as well. People lose their jobs for making bad jokes. We need to be free to say stupid things. As a society, young people need to be free to make mistakes. What kind of society are we living in where, what do we really believe about rehabilitation, the possibility of rehabilitating, even criminals, if no one can be rehabilitated from something they did when they were 18?
On that note, Ashley, we've had the great and the good lining up this week to say that rehabilitation is a total waste of time in prison, so we can return to that a little later. But you've really caught my interest here about how it affects everybody. And I'm just wondering, in the light of what you've just said, would Justin Trudeau have been better off with a less effusive apology and just say, this is ridiculous, I made a mistake 20 years ago, everybody makes mistakes, let's move on?
Yeah, that would be great because at least it tells the rest of us, or I suppose it tells the rest of us that young people make mistakes. I think we need a culture that allows people to say stupid things, not just young people, but adults as well. You need to be able to be wrong. How can we have open conversations if everyone must be right all the time? The cultural conversation progresses by people being wrong, saying the wrong thing, and learning. And I never understand this impetus to shut down debate about things. I want to be right. How can I know if I'm right if I never argue?
How have we got here, Ashley? Because I didn't seem to be like this in the 90s, and then suddenly in the space of a few years, everyone's watching what they say all of the time.
Well, actually, it was a bit like this in the early 90s. Cool. There was another sort of culture war. But the interesting thing is that it was the conservative right that was saying a lot of the things that we now associate with the left. So it was a lot of sort of pearl-clutching kind of church ladies that were very worried about libertinism and offensive things like pornography and so on. And now that's very true. To be associated with the left. But actually what I think is really deeper and dangerous about this is not just the issues around free speech, which are also very important, but also I think we like to tackle these low-hanging fruit, these obvious signs of racism like blackface and brownface, because it's easy. We can make a rule and say nobody wears brownface, nobody wears blackface. But actually I think much more dangerous than Trudeau and blackface or brownface is Trudeau being the slick politician, because it's through this racism today is so dangerous because it doesn't actually operate in the way that it used to with broken windows and racial slurs on doors. Yes, that does happen, but to a far lesser degree. But what is much more dangerous is the racism that operates through kindness and flattery, because if you look at Canada, Trudeau says all the right things. He takes all the right photo ops. But look at policy. You've got immigration policy in Canada that cherry-picks middle-class professionals while making it almost impossible for poor and desperate people to make it to Canada to get a better life. Instead, you give them these exploitative visa arrangements for guest workers who have few rights, few chances at citizenship. But no, just say all the right things. Make sure that you show you're kind and so on. And you can do these sorts of things with impunity. They talk about Indigenous people in Canada in this flattering and deferential language, all the while removing children from Indigenous families in bigger numbers than was the case during what we call the 60s scoop, when huge numbers of kids were taken away from their parents. And in the research I'm seeing at the moment, I see it over and over. They're saying, oh, we're so sorry. It's our fault that you're in this situation. It's colonialism, you see. That's why you're so messed up. We're very sorry to take children. But that's what racism is today. It is kind, and that's why it's dangerous.
This is an absolutely fascinating conversation. I have to say, actually, I'm going to here and now extend an invitation, and maybe we can lure you in from Swansea University to talk a little bit more about the sort of the inherent racism, or this new form of racism. But just by way of conclusion, as I've got to get to the news, we have talked quite a lot on this show about our folk traditions, about Morris dancers, and the cross-border Morris tradition of blackface, which supporters, and I would count myself as one of them, say has nothing to do with racial stereotypes. It's to do with disguise and such like. Should our cross-border Morris dancers be allowed to continue in blackface?
I think that these sorts of things have cultural meanings and cultural legacies, and there's one part of it that is a really damaging cultural legacy, and there are other parts of it that have a cultural legacy that's meaningful for other groups. What I think we need is some understanding and context. Instead, we just assume the absolute worst of everyone, and that kind of misanthropy is not good for citizens, it's not good for freedom, and it's just not good in general.
And now to bring our little podcast to an end. One story you won't have read in David Cameron's memoirs but may have heard on Talk Radio is how angry SNP MP Angus MacNeil is over claims in this book that David Cameron may have inadvertently persuaded the Queen to come out in favour of the Union in the 2014 Scottish independence ref.
If we start joining the dots here, this could be quite serious, couldn't it, with regard to the referendum of 2014?
Well, I mean, I think the serious part is we know that Boris Johnson is in the doodah at the moment for the problem is leading the Queen in purgation of Parliament. Yes. But this is more serious. I mean, this is David Cameron throwing out the rule book and trying to involve the Queen in political issues when he himself was floundering. Now, the Queen's choice of words was very interesting, and I know as a monarchist, I resent David Cameron trying to involve Her Majesty in his particular political aspects when he himself was struggling. But the Queen said, think carefully, and the third to the half of people who came over to join in the yes vote is exactly what they did. They thought very carefully, and they thought being independent was the best deal, and they thought the Queen being Queen of 17 independent countries was better than Queen being the Queen of 16 independent countries like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, whatever and whatever,
And Buckingham Palace certainly aren't happy. I believe a statement has been issued earlier this afternoon in which the word displeased was used with regard to David Cameron's revelations. They're revelations that are part of this BBC TV interview he's given. I suppose, in my mind, Angus, I mean, I'm inclined to believe that if he spoke to the private secretary and the private secretary did his job and spoke to the Queen, that you can draw a line between David Cameron saying maybe the Queen can get involved and the Queen getting involved. The one thing we can't do with absolute certainty is say that the Queen said something did get involved because of David Cameron. If we could say that, then this would be a major crisis, would it not?
Well, I think what is a problem is that David Cameron trying to involve the Queen. That full stop is the problem. Interestingly, and I'll give you an exclusive here, the Queen's private secretary at the time was a man called Christopher Wright, whose first cousin is an SNP councillor in Stornoway, in the island of Lewis, near to the Hebrides. So there's no problem. Now, Christopher Wright's safely in the House of Lords, so he's sort of untouchable, so we can say these things now. But I think the Queen's choice of words was actually very interesting. But I think the more interesting thing constitutionally is the Prime Minister throwing out the rule book. I mean, it's not up the levels of Putin who throws out the rule book, but I mean, it's certainly on the first steps of that kind of behaviour. When we know now the UK government is struggling, we see it with Boris anyway, that there is no rule book. But we can also see that 5 years ago yesterday, when the Scottish referendum was held, there was no real rule book then either. They were thrown every form of Project Fear with this, and that's why they got unstuck, incidentally, at the Brexit referendum, because they tried the same tactic. But as Alex Salmond said, the sewer that was the tabloid press, which has thrown it in the right direction for them, fired it right back at them in reverse when it came to the Brexit referendum. So what about the attempts by David Cameron probably are the things that actually undid him. And I mean, I don't think that the Queen's intervention would have changed anybody's mind either.
Do you not?
I think people are mature and sensible enough.
Okay, I mean, I'm just wondering if people were sort of on the fence over the issue, the sort of floating voters, whether they might have been persuaded by the Queen intervening. One might argue that she presents, I suppose, a slightly more engaging possibility for the electorate than seeing David Cameron wandering around with Gordon Brown side by side and Nick Clegg. I mean, that seemed one way of putting people off going to the ballots would be see those three on parade.
I mean, the Queen would have remained Queen of Scotland, and we would have been without the Nick Cleggs, the Miliband, the David Camerons, the Boris Johnsons, the Jeremy Corbyns. You know, as we talk, I'm probably convincing your listeners and of course your studio that Scottish independence is a great idea to be rid of those characters.
Well, you wouldn't have to try very hard to persuade me, although, Angus, it has to be said that the people of Scotland may need a bit more persuasion, because we're seeing newspaper reports suggesting that independence, the appetite for independence has diminished somewhat in recent times.
That was a rogue poll yesterday by Scotland in the Union who confused the question, and they didn't say yes, no, they said remain, leave, and confused it with Europe. But of course, I am for remaining in the European Union and leaving the United Kingdom. That's the remain, leave that I'm into.